we're getting set up, is there anything that you'd like to tell us about yourself with regards to your judging in debates, or anything in particular that you would like to see or not see?
I remember you from Bothell.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you judge one of my speeches?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I did. I just remember your face. Well, the only philosophy that I have, I umpired in the Pac-10 Conference baseball for almost 20 years. And I've seen a lot of debates in that regard. But all that I'd like to see you guys do is just convince me.
All right.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
What's the resolution?
I think actually we're supposed to tell you that at the start of our speech.
Okay.
We can tell them now. Resolution is that creativity can be taught.
Okay.
So
Let me write that down.
creativity can be taught.
Creativity can be taught.
Okay. Guys ready?
Hi, I'm Grayson Smith.
I'm Jerry Lehman.
All right,
Nice to
Prime
meet you,
Minister. Nice
Grayson.
to meet you. Thank you for
Yes.
judging.
All right, I'm Roman Smith, member of
Hello,
government.
Jerry Lehman.
Grayson.
Nice
Thank
to
you,
meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Joseph Munson, Leader of Opposition. Thanks for judging.
Jerry Lehman.
Chandler Wilson, member of
Sure,
PNC.
Chandler. Jerry Lehman. I'm as ready as I can get. So.
All right, then. If the audience is ready? Roman?
Yep.
And is the camera ready?
Yes.
Is it ready? Okay, all right. All throughout our lives, we're educated on certain areas. We're taught to do X, we're taught to do Y, we're taught to do Z, algebra, science, etc., etc. One question has plagued a lot of psychologists for a long time. Can creativity be taught? The stance of the government team in this debate round is yes, creativity can be taught, which is why we stand resolved that creativity can be taught. Now, before moving into the contention of the government team trying to prove why this is true, let's take a look at a couple of issues of how we're going to analyze this resolution in the debate round. There's three different things we'd like to look at. First of all, a couple of definitions, and secondly, the burden of the government team in the round. Definition one is that of creativity. We define creativity as the ability to create new ideas or concepts. So creativity is essentially being able to gather information and being able to use that information to come up with ideas and concepts. Definition two is taught. Taught is the ability to learn. So if you're able to learn creativity, that means that you're able to be taught creativity. And the third is that of the burden of the government team. The burden of the government team in this debate is to prove that there is a scenario in which creativity can be taught. If we can prove that there is a single instance in which creativity can be taught, then we uphold the resolution. Given the resolution just asks us, can creativity be taught? If we can prove there's an instance in which that is true, then the government has upheld the burden and the government ballot is justified. With that addressed, let's turn to our contentions. We're going to have several in this speech proving why creativity can in fact be taught. Contention number one is that of your environment. Your environment. Now, when you're growing up or even in the adult world, your environment, it does really affect you. The people you're around, the ideas you discuss, that affects you. For example, when you're growing up, whether you grow up around people who are creative or people who stick to the norm, that affects how you learn. That affects how your education progresses. If you grow up around people who are creative and are always thinking of new ideas and talking about new ideas, that increases the possibility that you will actually be able to learn creativity rather, from them. So there definitely is an instance in which while you're growing up, your environment does affect you and your environment does affect your learning process. If you're around creative people, then you learn how to be creative by them. So you can learn from others and your environment can teach you how to be creative. Contention number two is that of critical thinking. Critical thinking. This one is pretty important. Essentially, we are saying that if you are able to be taught critical thinking, then you're able to be taught creativity. Because critical thinking, the ability to look at concepts and to think of new concepts and analyze them, that's very important when it comes to creativity. Critical thinking is part of what helps you be creative. And obviously critical thinking can be taught, like in debate, we are taught critical thinking, and that helps teach us creativity. So given we can be taught critical thinking, and given that leads to creativity, that's another area in which creativity can be taught, because the tool that we use for creativity is critical thinking. And given critical thinking can be taught, we are then taught the tool to be creative ourselves. Contention number three is that of creative destruction. Creative destruction. Now, this is specifically something in the business world where there's an old product that is replaced by a new product, essentially innovation. Like with a bow and arrow, it was replaced by a gun. That's called creative destruction. Building a new product to replace an old product. This is a form of creativity. Innovation is a form of creativity. And can this be taught? Absolutely. Why are there business majors in college? One of the things that business majors, I'm sure, focus on is the ability to come up with new ideas and innovation. Obviously, it can be taught, given we have so many great business leaders in the world today that are coming up with new ideas. Creativity is taught in college, when the business is taught in the business world. Clearly creativity, given how much innovation we've had in the past, clearly it can be taught and can be learned by other people. Contention number 4 is that you can teach yourself. You can teach yourself. Essentially, we're saying that you can learn from what you do. You can actually force yourself to be creative. I'm not sure whether you've seen the movie The Dead Poets Society about Robin Williams in a college, but essentially he's trying to teach one of the kids how to write a poem and how to really come up with those new ideas. And he's just telling him, well, what do you see in this picture? Do you see the man with the chipped tooth, the man with the bad breath? And the guy just closing his eyes in front of the whole class. He closes his eyes and he starts yelling out what he sees. And it's creative and it's new. You can put yourself in a situation in which creativity comes to you. Given creativity is a concept that God has put in all of us, it can come to you in situations where you need it. You can definitely learn how to apply the creative brain that we have inside of us. You can definitely learn how to apply the creativity that we're taught. Contention number 5 is that of creative writing. Creative writing. Now there's 2 parts to this. The first part to this is that of creative writing classes. There are many classes that try to teach you how to write creatively, how to come up with new storylines and new plots and new plot twists in order to teach your audience. One of my friends that I know pretty well, Justin Collins, he actually went to a creative writing class. He said it was actually very helpful for him in helping to boost his creativity when it comes to his writing. And I know this is something really important in debate as well. Being able to come up with creative concepts, being able to write out creative concepts and be able to give them to the judge. That's exactly what we do in creative writing and debate. There are classes that are specifically designed to teach you creative writing. The second part of this is that all the stories that we hear, all the different movies that we watch, the books that we read, the articles that we read, all of those help feed into our ability to use our creativity for the better good. Whenever we look at something creative, that helps stir our brains and gets our brains clicking and helps us realize that, yes, we have that potential too. We have the ability to, once we learn it, we have the ability to be creative. So yes, creativity can be taught in all these instances, in all these situations. Creativity can be taught to you, whether it's through classes, whether it's through business, or even through life in your environment. Creativity definitely can be taught. Contention number 6 is that you can learn from others. You can learn from others, and this is one of the most important ones. I mentioned a little bit under the contention one of the environment, but I think this one has to be stressed a little more. Essentially, our argument here is that the more you're around creative people, the more you're around creative concepts, you learn from that. You learn by the example of others. My debate coach is very creative when it comes to writing up different debate cases, and I have learned from him how to be creative in writing up my debate case. So you can definitely learn from others how to be creative. There are all parts throughout life where we learn to be creative, where we adapt to situations. I'm sure in baseball, people came up with some pretty creative insults against the other players. I think we can pretty much learn from example, learn from others, learn from our environment, that there are definitely places in which creativity can be taught. If we as the government team can prove that there is a single situation in which creativity can be taught, then the government ballot is justified. At the end of the round, we ask you to vote for the government team because there are instances in which creativity can be taught. Thank you. Oh, sure. Can you let us know when protected time is?
Yeah, I'll just like give you.
Sure. Yeah, thanks.
I'll just like. And this button just starts.
Yeah.
This big one.
Yeah.
Great. So when the judge is ready, my opponents.
Mm-hmm.
All right. My mom made me take piano lessons for 7 years. Now that was pretty hard for me. 7 years of something that I absolutely hated.
I had 9.
Wow. Well, it's like my statistics beat me there. But really, in the end, what happened with 7 years of piano was that really I didn't have any knack for it in the first place. Number one, I didn't have the creative skill necessary to be able to succeed at piano. Really, in the end, even though I was taught how to do piano, I never really learned the important part, which was having the creative skill to succeed at it in the first place. Now, the affirmative team, government team, came up and brought up all these really contentions talking about creativity, but I think they missed the entire point of the resolution, which is that creativity is not something that really just comes out of nowhere. Creative ability is something that people are born with. If I'm born with the creative ability to be able to have this amazing amazing skill on the piano, then once I'm starting to be taught piano, I'm not only going to learn how piano works, that creative skill is really going to come out of me, and I'm going to be able to succeed at piano. Now, that's really what we're going to be talking about throughout this speech. Let's start off with the definitions and the analysis they brought up at the very beginning. First of all was their definition of creativity. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of disagreement with this definition of creativity because it really encompasses everything. They basically define it as the ability to make new ideas or new concepts, basically like making something new. Now, everyone, no matter if they're a creative personality or not, really has the ability to do that. That's not the definition of creativity that I think the resolution is getting at. I'd like to bring up the counter definition, which we looked up, which is basically defining creativity as imagination, which is the much more general and broad term. I think it fits around better because theirs doesn't really talk about creativity. It's just talking about making new things. Now, whether or not you're an intuitive personality or a creative personality or a person who needs to learn it in a hands-on manner, all of these people can create new things, which is why their definition really doesn't apply to the creativity the resolution is talking about. The resolution is talking about imagination, basically the personality type of a creative person. Their second point under here was that basically they have to prove one instance of creativity being taught. My response is they have to prove every instance. They have to prove every instance, and here's why. The resolution is that creativity can be taught. That is a statement. Now that statement is either true or it's either false. Now take the statement that houses are green. Obviously, one example of a house that is not green proves that statement false, because then basically it's been proven that houses are not green. Yeah.
If the resolution is a house can be green, all you have to prove is that a house can be green, right?
That's correct, however, that's not what the resolution is asking. It's saying that creativity can be taught, not that an instance of creativity can be taught. That's the difference. You use a house, not houses. It's creativity in general can be taught. So it must be proven not through only one example, but it must be proven in general that creativity can be taught. All right, let's move on to their first contention. Actually, I'm going to start with my first contention, and then responding to their contentions through my contentions. My first contention is that teaching is a guarantee. Teaching is a guarantee. If something is taught, then that thing is learned. And basically, if that thing is learned, that is now a part of you. Now, the difference here, which we're going to be getting into in contention 2. Basically, contention 1 was just really brief. Contention 2 is here now. Personality cannot be reversed. Personality cannot be reversed. So basically, you can learn something that you haven't learned in the past. But that's the difference between basically learning a new thing, such as like math or science or history or a sport like baseball, or a personality trait. The problem is personality traits cannot be learned and they cannot be reversed. Now this is also in response to their contentions 1 and 6, which are about the environment and that we can learn from others. This isn't necessarily true, because we can learn things like math and baseball from people, but we can't learn personality traits from other people. I simply can't learn from someone with brown eyes how to have brown eyes, given I don't have that trait. I also can't really learn the creative aspect of piano from someone who knows about piano and does have that creative aspect, because I simply wasn't born with that creative aspect. Let's move on to my contention 3 now, which is that traits cannot be taught. Traits cannot be taught. Imagine the example of a young kid. I have 3 younger brothers and a bunch of younger cousins, so I've actually seen this quite a bit. Basically, when kids are, even from a really young age, before they're even able to be taught, maybe a 1-year-old for instance, you can already tell the dominant aspects of their personality, whether or not they're going to be quiet when they grow older, whether or not they like to, or they're going to have a building, whether or not they like to build, or they have this creative or intuitive side to their personality. You can really tell what type of personality they're going to have as they grow up. Really the thing here is, though, that a trait that someone is born with can't really be changed. Now, even if a person is really an introvert and they want to be an extrovert, they're going to struggle with that. They can't change who their personality is. So they may try to act like an extrovert, and even if it seems like they've learned how to be an extrovert, that does not mean they have actually become one, because you cannot reverse that trait of being an introvert or an extrovert. That's just one example, but you can't reverse that trait. The trait that you're born with and the trait that's created for you is the trait that you're going to carry with you throughout the rest of your life. It's really not something that can be reversed. Now, going back to the thing about teaching. Teaching is something that you don't know, and then you're taught it, and then you do know it. There's no fluctuation here. So if someone wants to become from an introvert to more of an extrovert and have more imagination, be more creative, they simply can't be taught that. Someone can try to tell them how to do it. The problem is that it's not just X, Y, and Z thing, something that can easily be taught and learned. The thing is that it's a personality trait that simply can't be taught and simply can't be handed from one person to another person. Let's move on to my contention 4, that creativity is a trait. Creativity is a trait. basically the ability to be creative and the ability to have these things, have imagination, that is a trait that you're born with. Some people are born with it. I know lots of people who have this trait, but some people are not born with it. And it also applies to different areas. Someone could be creative in one area, but not creative in another area. It really depends on the exact scenario and the exact context. Now moving on to some of their other contentions. Let's go to their contention 2 and 3. I'm going to combine these because they were basically the same thing. My response is taught how to be used. Taught how to be used. Now they had some great examples about seemingly places where creativity can be taught. However, the key distinction here is that they're not teaching creativity. They are teaching these people how to access the creativity they were already born with. One example is basically the business class that he talked about in his speech. He's not, in this example, they're not teaching the people to be creative. They're teaching the people how to use the creativity that they were already born with. People cannot create creativity that they weren't born with. They can learn how to refine it and actually gain access to it. And the same goes, actually, this responds to contentions 2, 3, and 5. So I did respond to all of them. But in the end, creativity can't be taught. If it's taught, it's refined. It's not taught from scratch. Really, you can only refine creativity and change how you've learned it in the past. You can't actually teach creativity. Thank you.
You ready?
I'm all set.
All right. Opposition? Grayson?
Mm-hmm.
All right then. Essentially, the debate before us today is the classic psychological debate of nature versus nurture. What influences how people are, what the kind of people they become? Is it how they are born, their nature, the biological aspects of how they were born, or is it nurture, what they learn as they grow up, how they become because of their environment? Most psychologists agree that it's a combination of nature gives you something and then nurture is required in order to fulfill what you were born with. And that's basically what we're going to be saying in today's debate on, is that creativity is something that has to be learned. It's not something that you can just, basically it's not something that you can take with you in life no matter what happens to you. Let's look at an example of this that my partner talked about. If there was a young kid, a young child who grew up in a fulfilling home, a home with loving parents, his mind would be fostered. He'd be able to foster that creativity in his mind. But if that child grew up in an abusive home with parents who didn't love him, who were abusive to him, that child would not grow up with that same creativity because he had not been fostered as a child in order to be able to learn how to think that way. And that's basically what we're saying. Let's go to the analysis under the definition of creativity. Now, the opposition, they told us that they think that the definition of creativity is imagination. Now, here's the problem with this. I have two responses to this definition. The first is that this definitely applies to us too. Imagination can be taught because you can be taught basically how to broaden your horizons, how to broaden your imagination, what you can imagine. You can be taught to increase the way that you think. If imagination is basically just thinking the boundaries of how you can think, what you can think about, you can definitely learn new perspectives, new imagination. But my second response is that the definition we brought up is much better. The definition we brought up is that creativity is just the ability to create new ideas and new concepts. That's essentially what creativity is. If you just look at the word itself, creativity, it just means the ability to create. That's essentially what we're saying, is that it's just the ability to create new ideas and concepts, yeah?
So if we insert your definition into the resolution actually becomes basically new ideas can be taught.
Basically what the resolution says is, if you take our definition into account, basically what the resolution says is the ability to create new ideas and concepts can be taught or can be learned. If you look at the different definitions there. Basically, the process of that can be learned. Under the argument of the single instance, they said we have to prove every single instance of creativity being able to be taught, and brought up the example of a house. Now we said that you can't prove houses are green by saying one house is green. But that's not how it would go in the resolution. If the houses are green example would go into this resolution, it would say houses can be green. All you have to do is prove that one house is green in order to prove that a house can be green. That's exactly what we're doing here. If we prove one instance in which creativity can be taught, that means that creativity can be taught. Even if it can't always be taught, it can be taught. That's essentially what we're saying. So let's go to the negative team's contentions. Now, before we go into any of this, I'd like to bring up a simple logic point. Think of this debate round. When we were prepping in the other room, both teams were creating arguments for our different sides. The negative team, opposition, was creating their contentions about what they believed to be true. We were creating our contentions for what we believed to be true. We were creating all of those. Now, if you took me back in time to several years ago, before I was in debate, I wouldn't have been able to do that because I didn't have the critical thinking skills that I have today. Before I was in debate, I wasn't able to think through things very well. I wasn't able to take concepts and think about them and then create new ideas. I wasn't able to do that before debate. When I went into team policy and now parliamentary debate, I basically learned how to think critically, and now that I've learned that, I can be creative and come up with the contentions, the arguments that we're debating about today, and the same is true of the negative team. We learned how to be creative with these things. We learned how to do this process. Essentially, creativity, we're not just talking about teaching facts, we're talking about teaching processes, thought processes. So now let's go to the contention one of teaching is a guarantee. They talked about basically how you can't teach creativity because it's something you're born with, and this is basically every single one of their contentions is basically at the end that creativity is a biological trait, not something that you can learn. I would contend that this is actually a somewhat offensive point of view because this implies that some people do not have the ability to create. If creativity is imagination or is the ability to create, either way, it doesn't make sense to say that some people are not born with that. Everyone is born with the ability to create. That's just how we're born. If you look at it from either an intellectual standpoint, a spirituality standpoint, no matter what perspective you look at it from, everybody has the ability to create and have imagination. Now, the negative team said that creativity is a personality trait. The reason that this is wrong is because personality traits only exist to differentiate people so that you can describe people. For example, breathing is not a personality trait because that's common to everybody, so you can't use that to describe people. Outgoing, however, that is a personality trait. So basically, in order for something to be a personality trait, it has to be something that is unequal, that not everybody has. If I say, well, I can breathe, or I have a body, or I have a heart, or something like that, something that is generally common to all humans, that's not a personality trait because it's common to everybody. In order for something to be a personality trait, it has to be unequal. Not everybody can have it. Yeah?
Are you saying that everyone has the same amount of imagination?
No, what I'm saying is that everybody does have the ability to have imagination, the ability to create new ideas. Some people, of course, are born with somewhat more of a disposition towards that, but the fact is that given that everyone is born with it, that proves that it's not a personality trait. What it means is that everyone is born with the ability to learn that, and then once they're given that ability to be able to learn creativity, then they have to learn it throughout their life, through a good environment, through the kind of things my partner and I have been talking about. So basically what this means is that the negative team is implying that creativity is biological, which implies that not everybody has it. But everybody does have the ability to be creative, but the fact is that they can only access that ability to be creative, they can only truly be creative once they've been taught how to do that through a good environment and such. Let's go to our contentions. Under contentions 2 and 3 of critical thinking and creative destruction, they said that creativity can only be taught how to be used, it can't be taught itself. But that's not true. Basically, the ability to be creative is the ability to have a thought process of creating new ideas and new concepts or imagination. And that can definitely be taught. Again, just look at this debate round. We're all debating new ideas and concepts that we're all thinking of on the go, and we're able to do that because we were taught how to think critically by debate coaches or by experience in debate. We were taught how to do this. We weren't just born like this. We were born with a disposition to be able to do this, but we had to be able to be taught how to be creative. So at the end of the day, what we can see is that creativity is taught by teaching you the thought process of imagination and creating new ideas. Thank you.
Everyone's ready?
All set.
In this debate, we want to make it very clear the distinction between having the ability to do something and refining the ability to do something. I don't normally get a judge like you, so the ability to use baseball analogies is pretty fantastic here. For me, a lot of people are born with different abilities. Everyone is born with the same body, basically. However, we're all born with different builds, basically. So some people can be more inclined to sports, while other people are more inclined to do more thinking. This is why you simply have different groups. Some people are good at sports, other people are not. For me, I had that natural ability that I was just athletic, I was quick, and so baseball became actually one of my passions, and I still play it. Now, for me, baseball was something that I had the ability to do. I started out, and it was already something that I was good at. However, I still had to be taught the ability to use my skills and to make myself better. However, the difference here is that I was not taught the ability to be athletic. I was taught how to use my athleticism to help me become better at baseball and to become better at sports. However, the athleticism there was something that was not taught to me. It's something that I was born with. Now, with the government team's interpretation, essentially, of creativity, we said that it's a personality trait. It's something that you're born with. However, they said no, because everyone's born with creativity, to some sense of creativity, and we would agree with this. Every single person around the world has at least some sense of creativity. However, a lot of people have simply more creativity than others, and they were born with that amount of creativity. This is why you have right brain and left brain people. This is why you have engineers and why you have art majors, because people are born with a sense of basically how creative they are and how they learn. Now, they brought up the example of essentially that everyone, or especially here in debate, that we have become very good at critical thinking, at the ability to come up with arguments and come up with reasoning at a very fast pace, which is something that none of us would have been able to do 4 or 5 years ago. However, that's something that we were all born with a sense of coming up with logic, of reasoning. However, through debate, we were able to harness those skills and hone them and simply make them better. However, we weren't taught how to be reasonable. Every single person is reasonable, at least to some extent. However, the ability to actually hone those skills and to make them better is different than actually being taught them. You can be taught how to do something, and you can be taught how to improve something. And that's the difference here, is that creativity is not something that can be taught. It's something that can be improved. And can be essentially different, or can be made different throughout our life based on different circumstances that, like the environment, like they pointed out, or just by being taught things by other people. However, that's not changing the way that we were actually born with that personality trait. It's simply changing how we're able to use it. So that's the big picture. Really what we want to be focusing on in today's round. Now, starting off at the top, we used imagination as essentially our interpretation of creativity. That someone who is more imaginative is going to be much more creative. Now, this is true between me and my partner. He's much more analytical and much more logical, and I'm more thinking outside the box. Creativity is something that I love. I love dance, I love actual drawing, and I love music. It's something that is more self-expression and more outside the box, whereas he's very great at sitting down and doing things that are much more logical, and that's a personality trait. That's simply how we were born and how, and throughout our lives we've developed those personalities and made them better to many extents. However, that's simply how we were born. People are not born the same. People are born differentiated. Now, they said that in order for something to be a personality trait, it has to be uncommon. They said that every single person is born with some extent of imagination. So therefore, it's not a personality trait. That it has to be something that you can distinguish someone by. That you can't say. Essentially, what happens here is everyone is born with hair. However, some people are born with different colors of hair or different amounts of hair. That's essentially how it is with imagination. It's not something that you can physically see. However, it's simply how people think and how they were programmed, basically. Now, some people are born with more imagination than others, and they're able to essentially harness that throughout their life and learn how to use that to enhance their ability to do things. However, their ability to simply be creative was not something that was taught to them. It's something that they already have. Their ability to use it and harness and refine those skills is a much different thing. Now, looking down at their contentions, basically, just going over everything once again, the environment that you're born into affects how you're able to use skills. They brought up the analogy of the different types of homes that people are brought up in. If you're born into a very nice family, a good, strong family, they said that you're going to be much more likely to be creative, and that if you're born into not as great of a family, that you're not going to be as great at using your imagination. However, this simply isn't a great example, because we can see that if you're born into a family where you have to fend for yourself, you're going to actually have to use your creativity in a way that you wouldn't have had to otherwise in order to actually fend for yourself and take care of yourself. So your environment controls how much you refine your skills and how much you change your skills that you were already born with. However, the ability to think creatively and to be imaginative is not something that is learned throughout your life.
Okay, so in that scenario that you were talking about where a child would have to fend for themselves, you're saying they would have to learn to be creative in order to get around that?
They would have to learn how to use their creativity. So it's essentially the environment that you're in, whether you have a teacher, whether you don't have a teacher, affects how you learn. However, what you start with is essentially, it's different for many different people, and you can't teach someone something new like this, like creativity. You can teach someone math. For me, math is not really my subject. It was hard for me to learn math. However, someone taught me math. Now the difference here, we'd also like to make the distinction between actually teaching and just learning. Because you can, for me, I was taught math. However, you can't learn, I was taught math. It was something that was imparted to me. It was information taken from point A to point B. Now I have it. However, with imagination, it's something that you can teach the ability to use your imagination. That can be taught from someone else. However, the imagination, where it comes from, that creativity, that spark, is something that simply originates at one point. It can't be transferred. That original imagination, those original ideas.
Okay, so are you saying that some people are born without the ability to create things and there's nothing they can do about
No,
that?
I'm saying there's different extents that people are born with different extents of creativity that people are born with. You can't increase the amount of creativity that you have. You cannot increase the amount of creativity that you have. You can increase your ability to use your God-given creativity. That's the distinction here. Looking down, they said, looking back at actually our points once again. So the first point was talking about how teaching is a guarantee. Essentially, to teach creativity is basically imparting that knowledge and helping someone have more creativity. However, the difference is that you cannot have more creativity, you can just learn how to use it better. And that's the distinction that we want to be making. Creativity cannot be taught. Thank you. Right.
Oh, that's right. All right. All right, Judge, ready? You guys ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, in this last speech of the round for the opposition team, we're just going to be looking over the issues, showing you how, at the end of the day, the resolution that creativity can be taught is simply not true. Let's start off right at the top with the definition debate. Now, they talked about their definition they brought up in their first speech. They talked about this again, saying that, first of all, imagination can be taught, and secondly, that their definition was better. I have a couple responses. First of all, against imagination can be taught. My argument here wasn't that imagination really can be taught, because taught, as I said in my first speech, is going from 0 to 10 or 12 or whatever level you reach, like math. People are born without knowing math, or without knowing the English language. However, eventually they're taught that. But we're talking about something different, because people are born with creativity. And even the government team agreed with us here. So since people are born with creativity, it's actually impossible to teach it to them because they're already at a certain level of creativity. It's not teaching it, it's refining it and helping them access it more. Therefore, our definition of imagination still actually supports our case and our contentions that imagination or creativity cannot be taught. Their second response was that their definition is better. Well, their definition is really all-encompassing, and it's not actually talking about what the resolution is talking about. If their definition were true, the resolution would basically be that, basically saying that making things can be taught, which clearly isn't the intent of the resolution. It's talking about the personality type of creativity, such as an intuitive person versus a sensing person. Basically contrasting that with the different personalities. It's talking about a personality type. It's not talking about the ability to make something, because that would clearly be outside the scope of this resolution, and that would be easy to prove. And basically, you could prove that making things can be taught, and that would be too easy to prove. That's exactly why it's not. That shouldn't be the interpretation for this round. It should be that imagination can be taught, or talking about creativity as a personality type is the much better interpretation of the resolution. Now, they responded to the point about every instance, saying that basically they only have to prove one instance in order for the resolution to be true. Let me just clear this up one final time. So if there's one instance where we prove that creativity cannot be taught, basically that proves that there is an instance where creativity cannot be taught. therefore disproving the resolution that must be affirmed as true, that creativity can be taught. So that would disprove the resolution. Let's move on to a couple of voting issues, or reasons why you should be voting for the opposition ballot at the end of the round. Voting issue 1. Everyone is born with creativity. Everyone's born with creativity. I'm actually going to use their own argument against them here, because in their last speech they spent quite a while talking about this, how everyone's born with creativity just at different amounts. First of all, the fact that they're born with it basically agrees that it's a trait. It's not something that you learn. It is in fact a trait. Now, people are born with different traits, like what color their eyes are, what color their skin are. Those are different traits. But they're all agreeing with us that it's a trait, because this is you're born with it just at different levels, which is why people are different in different levels of creativity that they're born with. However, here's where the problem arises. Basically, my argument in my last speech was of taught. Taught is going from absolutely zero, having no knowledge of this subject, to actually having knowledge of this subject, such as the English language. Kids aren't born knowing the English language. They have to be taught the English language. However, with creativity, my opponents even agree that all people are born with certain levels of creativity. What this means is that since they're born with it, they're not actually taught it once they learn how to hone it or refine it. They're simply gaining the knowledge of how to access that, basically refining their creativity. So this argument is a very important one, that these people, they're born with creativity, therefore it cannot be taught to them, it is simply refined and increased. This is a very important argument. My second voting issue is of refined, not taught. Refined, not taught. And I'm just going to be talking about some of the issues I brought up in my first speech. Basically, they agreed with my contention that creativity is a trait. So it is something that these people are born with. Creativity is a trait. Traits are differences between different people. So if one person has brown eyes and one person has blue eyes, that's a difference in their traits. If one person has a lot of creativity that they're born with and one person has little creativity, that is another difference in the trait. So basically going over this point, even if someone seems to increase in the amount of creativity they have over their lifespan, that is not because they were taught creativity. It is because they were taught how to access or how to hone that creativity. This is the key distinction in this round, really. Going back to the example of myself and basically learning how to play the piano. I wasn't successful at learning how to play the piano because even though I was taught, and actually my mom paid for my piano lessons, and I did it for 7 years, I could simply not gain enough creativity in order to play that piano because I was born with low levels of, I guess, musical creativity, you could say. I'm also really bad at singing, just FYI. So really at the end of the day, you should be voting for the opposition team because I think we've proven that creativity can't be taught because it's a trait everyone's born with, and really that is only ever refined. It's never really created from scratch. That's what I want to leave you with at the end of the round. Thank you so much. Judge ready?
Yeah, I'm all set.
All right, now opposition.
Yep. Everyone is born with muscles, but you can be taught how to be strong. Everyone is born with some athletic talent, like Chandler, but you can be taught how to become an athlete. That's really our stance of the government in this round, that everyone is born with imagination, yes, but creativity is the application of that imagination. Creativity is the ability to harness that imagination and use it to produce. Creativity is not something that everyone is born with when it comes to whether or not it exists and whether or not you can apply it. Creativity is us being able to apply our brains and apply our imagination. So yes, everyone is born with imagination, but creativity is the ability to use that imagination for the greater good. This final government speech, we'll be taking a look at the final arguments that the opposition has brought up, and really the whole opposition stance is that the creativity is really, you're born with creativity, and that imagination is the same as creativity. Let's take a look at the definition under this.
Point of order.
Yes.
Just to make sure, the resolution is that creativity can be taught, not that the application of creativity can be taught.
Right. Our definition of creativity is the ability to come up with new ideas or concepts. So creativity is the application of our imagination, of our creativity. Is that all right? Okay, cool. So moving on, let's go to the definition of whether or not creativity is imagination or the ability to bring up new concepts. Now, the opposition team said that creativity is imagination, and so they should win the debate round. However, if creativity was imagination, this debate round would be totally pointless, because everyone is born with a brain, thus everyone is born with imagination. Their definition of creativity is far too broad for this debate round to even exist. If creativity was imagination, then this wouldn't have been a resolution, because obviously everyone is born with a brain, thus born with imagination. So the argument by the opposition that somehow creativity and imagination are synonymous simply doesn't apply in this debate round. Yes?
Point of order, I think this is a new argument that should have been brought up in the constructive.
I believe not. Roman in the 2AC, in the member of government speech, specifically talked about imagination versus creativity, about how we're all born with imagination. Creativity is the application of that imagination, and that creativity is actually the correct way to define the resolution. Our definition of creativity is the right way to look at the resolution. Now, moving on to their argument about whether or not it can be taught. Now, Joe essentially said in the last speech that taught means 0 to 10. However, that's not exactly how life works. You see, we're all taught, we're all born with a brain. Math, the skill of math, is learning how to apply our brain. Creativity is a skill that we can learn to apply our brain. Of course, everyone's born with a brain, but creativity and learning math and learning piano, that's our ability to apply our brain to these subjects. On the issue of whether or not, what we have to prove, the opposition team said that we have to prove creativity can be taught in every situation. And if they can prove it can't be taught in one situation, then it's not true. But grammatically, that's incorrect. The resolution says creativity can be taught. If we can prove that there is a single instance in which that is true, then it is true. If we can prove that there is an instance in which creativity is taught, then the statement is proven true that creativity can be taught. Because the word can isn't an absolute. The word can is referring to there is a situation in which this is possible. If we can prove there's a situation in which creativity can be taught, then the resolution is proven true. And the examples I brought up in my first speech, for example, a creative writing class. That's an example I brought up in my first speech that the opposition didn't really specifically refute. That there are classes designed to help you with creative writing. And that the stories you read in the movies you watch, those help you build up your creativity and allow you to apply your imagination better. The environment you grew up in and the people you're around, that helps you apply your creativity better. You see, everyone is born with imagination. That is factual. That is a true statement because everyone's born with a brain. Creativity is the ability to harness that imagination and use it differently, and use it to produce new ideas and new thoughts. On the issue of whether or not the example that Chandler brought up of being brought up in an abusive home versus a home with nurturing parents, Chandler said that in an abusive home you have to fend for yourself by being more creative. That's exactly our stance. Be creative. That's something that you learn through your experiences. You learn how to be creative. That term, be creative, is something that we have to learn through our experiences. It's not like when you're born, you suddenly have everything that you need to be all creative and come up with all the new concepts and all the new ideas and all the new strategies. Those kinds of things are taught and imparted to you. That's exactly why the government ballot is justified, is because being creative is something that's taught. Creativity is application of imagination. That's exactly the government stance in the round. There are instances in which creativity can be taught, like in team policy debate, in parliamentary debate. Critical thinking and creativity can definitely be taught. We can definitely learn these issues, and because creativity is the application of imagination, we would ask for the government ballot and to uphold the resolution. Thank you.
Nice job, you guys.
Thank you, Judge.
Very good. You bet. Thank you so much. Hey, good job.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thanks for the chat.
So once they figured out you like the Huskies, did they ban you from being anymore?
No, I had, my two boys both were Huskies.
Yeah, so was my dad.
But I don't do it anymore. I decided to let somebody else do it.
Yeah.
I did it for a long time.
Pretty cool.
That was long enough. Then I evaluated umpires for 7 or 8 years too after I stopped umpiring. That was easy, a lot easier because you didn't get yelled at.